Shalom from Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue, and a huge happy birthday to the United Synagogue, of which we are so proud to be a part. Let me tell you about a privilege that I share with the United Synagogue. On a 100th anniversary, going back 50 years, well, we don't have to go back 50 years in my case, because on the 100th anniversary of the province of Alberta, when Rabbanit and I were living in Edmonton, the Queen came to celebrate the centenary of the province, and we were honored to join her for dinner. Now, that was the centenary. Here's where United Synagogue comes into it. At the centenary of United Synagogue 50 years ago, the Queen also graced United Synagogue with her presence. So there we have centenary with the Queen. See, what's different, though, is that when we dined with the Queen, it was only 15 years ago, whereas United Synagogue was with the Queen half a century, 50 years ago. In other words, the United Synagogue is even older than most Canadian provinces. That's how firmly established United Synagogue is. Just to give you a perspective on what else happened in the year 1870 when the United Synagogue was established. That was the year that the Brooklyn Bridge was built. That was the first year where the International Association of Football held a match. It was between England and Scotland. It was the first tube under the River Thames, the Tower Subway. Do you know why the formation of the United Synagogue was such an important moment in our history? Well, in this week's parasha, the daughters of Tzlafchad make another appearance. You'll remember last week when the land was being divided up amongst the Israelite families. They were divided up according to households with men at the head of the household. And yet the daughters of Tzlafchad, all five of them, come to Moshe and they say, "We don't have any brothers. We're not going to get a portion in the land. We would like to have our deceased father's portion." Moshe takes their case to God, and God says, indeed, that is the law. They will get the portion. Now, in this week's parasha, we have their cousins who turn to Moshe, and they say, well, wait a sec. What if our Tzlafchad's daughter cousins marry into other tribes? What will then happen is that the portion that's part of our Menashe area in the land of Israel will be transferred to another tribe. That doesn't seem fair. Moshe responds, you are right. They will marry within the tribe of Menashe. But here's the question. Why split the story? Why not have the whole story, the whole encounter with the daughters of Tzlafchad and their cousins all occur juxtaposed in last week's Sedra? Why have half of the story then, half of the story now? I will give you three answers. Answer number one is an answer given by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, 19th century Frankfurt. He said it's not until this week that we have the division of the 2.5 tribes who decide to stay in Transjordan on the east bank of the Jordan, when the remainder of the nation of Israel cross over the Jordan. Now, Menashe is divided, not by any choice of its own, but because Moshe decrees that in order to keep everyone together, there should be one tribe that travels back and forth. But here you have half of Menashe on one side, half of Menashe on the other side. And the members of Menashe say, wait a sec. As it is in the land of Israel, our portion is already divided in half. Now, on top of that, we're going to face a problem where these girls marry other tribes. We're going to lose even more of our portion because, of course, we know that the daughters of Tzlafchad loved the land of Israel, right? They were named after their great-grandfather Yosef because of his love of the land of Israel, his desire to be buried in the land of Israel. And so inevitably, their portions would have been inside the land of Israel, and it would have been diminished had they married into another tribe. Answer number two is given by the Torah Hamora, by Avram Saba in the 15th century in Castile. He says, well, what happened after the episode last week when the daughters of Tzlafchad managed to make a good case before Moshe and be property owners? You can imagine they became a little sought after. Suddenly, every nice Jewish boy, nice Israelite boy, calling them up, asking for a date. And so it was only now that their cousins, the other Menashites, said, whoa, 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 wait a sec. We want to make sure that the property and our cousins stay within the families of Menashe. We don't want them to be marrying into other tribes. Third answer is given by Rabbi Sachs. Rabbi Sachs says that the Torah here is distinguishing between individual rights and community rights. Individually, the daughters of Tzlafchad had a great point. They were entitled to inherit the land of their family. But then when there's a competing value, communal rights, and that was the challenge by their family of Menashe to Moshe, at that point the Torah says, well, we need to balance. Yes to individual rights, but there's also an even greater value that goes on communal rights. And communal rights sometimes have to override the individual rights. What's so incredible about the United Synagogue? Way back 150 years ago, in the year 1870, 5 formidable congregations recognized that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Imagine what humility that took, to be able to say we're going to give up a piece of ourselves, a piece of our own independence, to be able to create something greater than us, bigger than us, more united. The office of the chief rabbi, now with that relationship with the government, recognized by an act of parliament. They couldn't have done that on their own. It meant giving up a part of themselves for something greater. That unity took great humility. But I want to tell you something. Out of those 5 original congregations, only one still remains today, Central Synagogue. Meanwhile, though, it's not like we're down to 4. Today, United Synagogue consists of 62 congregations. In other words, by taking that step of humility and joining a united synagogue, these 5 congregations created a united legacy that endures till today, 150 years later. In essence, these congregations, albeit in a more united form, still exist. Their buildings may not exist, their individual names may not exist, but as a community, they continue to endure. You know, I mentioned a number of 150-year-old icons, such as the Brooklyn Bridge and International Football Association. Do you know which ones I didn't mention? I didn't mention the ones that were created in 1870 that are long gone, because they wouldn't mean anything to you. They've long since disappeared into the annals of history. There's no point mentioning them because they've long disappeared. Very few communities in the world, 150 years old, still exist today. We are so proud to call ourselves, as Hampstead Garden Suburb Synagogue, a proud member of the United Synagogue. On behalf of HGSS, we say happy birthday to the United Synagogue, and we look forward to being part of the United Synagogue for the next 150 years. Shabbat Shalom, Mazel Tov, Yom Holedet Sameach.